Jennifer Alejandra, and this is my report in LE 506 Literary Theory and Criticism. I chose the novel Alias Grace, written by Margaret Atwood, which is one of the highly acclaimed books based on true events. I'm also a fan of Margaret Atwood's works, and she is one of the most influential writers of our generation. In this report, I will be discussing the four parts. The first one is the background of the novel. This will be followed by the short introduction of the writer. And of course, we have the summary or synopsis, and also the critical analysis, which will be the Marxism and the feminism. Is Grace Marks really innocent or guilty? That's what we're going to find out also in the conclusion. So, what are you waiting for? Let's get started. Here's why you should add Alias Grace in your suggested reading list. Alias Grace is a novel written by Margaret Eleanor Atwood, a Canadian writer, in 1996. It won the Gillier Prize, a prestigious literary award given to a Canadian author of a novel or short story collection published in English. Atwood's novel is based from true events which happened in 1843 in West Canada. The writer fictionalizes the much publicized murders of Thomas Kinnear and his housekeeper and mistress, Nancy Montgomery. The two servants, Grace Marks and James MacDermott, were convicted. MacDermott was hanged while Marks was sentenced to life imprisonment. The case caught the curiosity of Atwood that she constructed a narrative and created the fictional character, like Dr. Simon Jordan, with a group of reformers and spiritualists who seek a pardon for Grace. The doctor who researched the case became fascinated with Grace's own version of what happened. In the story, the doctor tried to establish his perception with his with the mild-mannered ways of Grace Marks to the murders she was convicted. Synopsis. The novel is written in first-person narrative account as told by Grace Marks. The year is 1859 and she has served many years of a life sentence after being convicted of the murders of her wealthy employer. Since she's proven she's a model prisoner, she was given permission to work as a housekeeper at the house of the governor just across Kingston Penitentiary. She was under the supervision of the governor's wife, who led a circle of women reformists and spiritualists. Reverend Veringer is also part of the group who made many attempts to seek pardon for Grace. Every afternoon, Dr. Jordan meets with Grace in the sewing room of the governor's house to start their sessions. At first, she did not really trust the doctor because of her experience in the asylum. But since Dr. Jordan's kind and odd way of helping her recover her memory convinced Grace to reveal her side of the story. The rest of the novel is a depiction of past and present events that happened in Grace's life. Grace shared her life story starting with her childhood in Ireland. She was born to an alcoholic and abusive father, and when unable to support his family, they decided to move to Canada to find opportunities. While aboard the ship, Grace's mother died, and since they could not afford a proper burial, she was thrown to the sea. Arriving in Toronto, Grace's father became even more irresponsible. Instead of looking for work, he sent Grace to work for a wealthy family as a servant. Her wage will feed the family. It was in this It was in this household that she met Mary Whitney, her best friend and surrogate mother. Lively and outspoken, by nature, Mary frequently spoke critically about women's place, the unfair things in the world, as well as the incompetence of the wealthy classes. When Mary Whitney was impregnated by their employer's son, her lively nature was gone. Since the father is not going to support Mary Whitney, she resorted to abortion. Since the abortion was poorly done, she was not able to endure the pain and bled to death. She died while sleeping next to Grace. In her grief, Grace sought work elsewhere and soon moved out to the rural village of Richmond Hill. She worked with a wealthy Scottish gentleman named Mr. Kinnear, and alongside with two other servants, Nancy Montgomery and James MacDermott. Tension heightens between these three servants. James and Nancy were not always in good terms. James disliked women giving orders, especially if the one giving orders also had the same position as his. Grace's presence in the household also threatened Nancy's position as she feared that Mr. Kinnear will soon turn his affections to Grace. Nancy also happens to be his mistress. To solve all of her problems, Nancy decided to fire Grace and James while Mr. Kinnear was away. In his anger, James planned on killing her while Grace convinced him not to. He proceeded with his plan with an unwilling Grace as an accomplice. Upon Mr. Kinnear's arrival, he was shot dead. When Grace tries to run away, she fell down after MacDermott tried to stop her with a shot. After this, Grace claimed she no longer had the memory. As Dr. Jordan listens to Grace's narrative, he became unsure whether she is lying or telling the truth. There has been instances he can detect the reality of her amnesia. The more he studied each session, the more he is drawn to Grace and started dreaming about her. He himself is also puzzled, and this frustration often confused his desires. Unsure of what to make of all his findings, he finally agreed to let another doctor conduct hypnosis to let Grace reveal what really transpired. Dr. DuPont conducted it, and while under hypnosis, Grace spoke like she was a different person. She claimed to be Mary Whitney, and in an unusual voice, she said she assisted MacDermott in the murders. Grace had nothing to do with the murders, as insisted by Mary Whitney's spirit. Leaving him more confused, Dr. Jordan left Kingston and never returned again. After 13 more years, Grace finally gained her pardon and she left Canada and lived in Ithaca, New York. Jamie Walsh, another person she met while working in Mr. Kinnear's household, asked her forgiveness after his testimony did not favor Grace's conviction. He proposed to her and offered her his home in a lovely farm. Just like the dream Mary Whitney used to tell her that she would like to live in a house with flowers in the porch and pets, Grace realized she was able to fulfill that. Although the end of the novel did not reveal whether Grace was innocent or guilty of the crime, the reader has to infer based from the perspectives written in the novel. Now let's go to the critical analysis. The novel Alias Grace is more than just a story about the innocence or guilt of Grace Marks in the murder case. Margaret Atwood's novel painted several depictions of women living in British North America in the 19th century. She portrayed the various sociological and economic conditions women were subjected to in those times. It is quite interesting how class struggle and social realism are also described without outrightly pointing it out under the lenses of feminism. Although the heavily patriarchal, gender based society descriptions are evident, the writer's clear account of the economic situation, as well as the sociological aspect of it, provided the readers ample information to understand the significance of meaning in her role in the novel. There's so much to learn about there's so much to learn and to reflect about the significance of societal actions as well as women in general. The novel will be analyzed through the lenses of Marxism and feminism. The aim of this analysis is to shed light how class struggles, perceptions about women, and societal conditions became precipitating factors on how Grace Marks was judged. Through the eyes of Marxism, the 19th century growing industrialization affected the social and economic conditions of women in British North America. The year 1859 was the time when growing production of household goods by industrialized manufacturers turned women to consumers of household goods. This means they have more time to engage in social activities aside from their domestic duties. Women of lower class are given more work in factories or in the household of wealthier families. Middle class women have more time for education and pursue activities in the arts and other disciplines. In the novel, Margaret Atwood vividly penned the leisure lifestyle of women from middle class headed by the governor's wife of the Kingston Penitentiary. In the novel, there is a clear divide among classes, typical of a capitalism if one is going to use the lenses of Marxism. The bourgeoisie are the ones taking control and own means of production, while the opposite of which are the proletariats. This division, as dictated by class, can create massive differences towards social interaction. When the son of the wealthy employer refused to be responsible for Mary Whitney's plight, it was a clear indication of looking down on her status simply because she does not have anything to offer. This action led to a tragic death and may have something to do with how Grace viewed people of upper class. Distrust was noted in some lines and as well as wariness when Grace was around with people from this class. The most common issue in Marxism is class struggle. In the eyes of Marx, class struggle will never end. As Karl Marx said, the history of man is actually a history of class struggle. James McDermott, who is a proletariat, was consumed with anger towards his employer, Mr. Kinnear, especially with how he favorably treats Nancy Montgomery, another servant who is also his mistress. He has no remorse killing them both because he had been keeping that anger and was triggered when Nancy outrightly fired him. This class struggle is an example on what Marx said in his theory. Using Marxism, one can easily say Grace Marx was a victim because she was unluckily born from a lower class and a victim of class struggles. On the other hand, being born into poverty, harassed and abused from a very young age, and witnessed her friend's death could also be the reasons for her to commit murder. Her master plan all along was to tempt McDermott into committing a crime. As her lawyer once claimed, she could entice any man to do her will. Grace Marks may have known how society will see her poor state and her mild mannered ways may convince them how incapable she was of committing such heinous crime. She could have lied about having amnesia. After all, the conviction favored her more by reducing it to life sentence, but it was opposite with McDermott's death penalty. Since Mary Whitney used to tell her of the many ways the world can be so unfair, it was her way of avenging her death of how upper class people should be taught their lesson, and that sometimes proletariats may take matters into their hands and will not mind the consequences. Through the eyes of feminism, Margaret Atwood's novel painted several depictions of women living in British North America in the 19th century. She portrayed the various sociological and economic conditions women were subjected to in those times. As there is evidence of professionalization of public life, it is clear that this is still inclined towards men and created a gap between sex. Women are expected to make home and family life to their sphere, while men lead professional life or other activities outside home. This loss of status as being productive in the household was soon replaced with an idealization of woman and motherhood as an ultimate or aspired state in the 19th century. The women characters in the novel are well aware that the value of a woman in the 19th century was determined by her ability to fulfill the objects of the four cardinal virtues of true womanhood: piety, submissiveness, purity, and domesticity. Women are naturally regarded as religious, and piety is one of her strengths. They are well respected, and men are expected to find a pious woman as a suitable partner. It is also natural in those days that women's circle also include the clergy, and these relationships are foundations for meaningful causes such as reform. This is portrayed by the governor's wife and her circle of friends. Women are also expected to be pure sexually if not married. Evident in the conversation between Mary Whitney and Grace, how one must not hastily give in with what men want. Without sexual purity, a woman was regarded as a fallen angel, unworthy of respect in the community. This was the case of Nancy Montgomery, who is known mistress to her employer and to the community surrounding them. The gossip and the community's unfavorable view of her caused so much tension and also fear that Mr. Montgomery will soon turn his favor to a much younger girl, innocent and virginal. The perception of women in those days may have blinded the society on its judgment of the murder case. Because women are expected to behave in mild manner and do duties domestically, there's no way they're capable of committing a crime. Since men are stronger and physically capable, they're outrightly seen as the culprit. As such, this was the perspectives presented in the novel which somehow affected how the execution of a light conviction and even a pardon for Grace is possible. Conclusion. The ideal woman, as presented and promoted by the 19th century literature and magazine culture, is not aligned with reality. Reading from the plights of women in Atwood's novel, many felt that they could not live up to this ideal. Problems arise as to how one must conduct, especially when confronted with a disadvantageous situation. It is no wonder that for some to survive or integrate socially acceptable behavior with their own contradictory feelings, or even shield their contemporaries from their own disturbing inner emotions, one is compelled to role play. Grace's behavior during a hypnosis session could have been her way of voicing those arguments, emotions that she held back for fear that it might affect the way Dr. Jordan's diagnosis and will not favor her a pardon. She could have been pretending that Mary Witness' spirit possessed her so that as to be able to release her wrath for being tied up for so long, ranting the abuses she experienced at the hands of experts in the asylum, and the maltreatment from fellow women prisoners, and all the indignant criticisms and judgments she was subjected to by the circle of women who are studying her. From the way how lines are written, Grace is no ordinary woman. She is smart, sensitive, and brave, but she was poorly treated, miserable during her time serving the prison, and abused during her asylum treatment. She became a master player, a way of life for women of the Victorian period. She is capable of letting others believe what she says, an expert, much likened to how she meticulously completes a patch in a quilt. Her actions beguiled Dr. Jordan and even made him question his sanity. With carefully laid out plan, she was able to build a way out of the prison hell by constructing an impenetrable image of a reformed, pious, and well-mannered woman. The question of whether she is innocent or guilty was overshadowed by the many sufferings of a woman who, at the surface, may look fragile and soft, but deep down has this unwavering determination and strong desire to hide a dark secret and survive by all means. The doctor's inability to recover her memory and her own version of the story win at the end. Such was her strength. Was she guilty of the crime? Based from Atwood's written construct, it hinted of a guilt but masked by innocence and masterful portrayal of a changed, reformed woman. She may have been guilty of such crime, but she paid dearly for them, having spent majority of her youth in prison and asylum. In the end, her innocence prevailed, and that's what she was remembered for. Thank you for listening.